went through the Israeli media archives prior to John F. Kennedy's assassination. The articles that I found were pretty shocking. The correspondence and letters at Israel's initiative with the worsening situation in the Middle East. Kennedy refused Ben Gurion's requests at the time regarding developing nuclear weapons and receiving security assurances from the United States. In a further letter, Kennedy, on his own initiative, raised a sensitive issue and requested clarification regarding Israel's intentions. This was regarding Israel's nukes, but the article at the time stated it was a sensitive issue. Unnecessary concern. This initiative by the American president caused considerable concern among Israeli security circles. It wasn't just Israel. John F. Kennedy didn't want any country in the world to have nuclear weapons. He thought nuclear weapons were the greatest threat to mankind. So he was also actively working with the Soviets, trying to form a deal, a nuclear test ban treaty. And while he was doing that, he was also trying to stop the Israelis from developing any sort of nuclear weapon, both of which they were heavily opposed against. It shows here just how aggravated they were about this sensitive issue. They were really getting sick about the fact that John F. Kennedy kept applying this pressure to check out Israel's nuclear sites. This was an article, and it was sent by a U.S. Supreme Court justice called on President Kennedy to take decisive steps to ensure Israel's security. This was a U.S. Supreme Court justice, and this article is being posted in Israeli media. So a U.S. Supreme Court justice at the time said that President Kennedy simply wasn't taking enough decisive action for the security of Israel, and they were concerned about the fact that Egypt's president, Jamal Abdel Nasser, who's known as one of the best presidents in Egypt. He had a very pan-Arabist view. He wanted to create a much more unified, stronger, united Middle East. Regardless, they viewed that Egypt's president was a threat to Israel. He was incredibly powerful. Egypt's army is incredibly strong, and they were worried that he was already working on nuclear weapons. All of it was a lie, of course. And U.S. Supreme Court justices are now speaking out. Kennedy, why aren't you taking decisive action to ensure Israel's security? You're not doing a good enough job. So a lot of people felt like John F. Kennedy wasn't apparently protecting Israel enough because for some reason, when you're a U.S. president, you have to worry about protecting a tiny project in the Middle East that's not even your country. John F. Kennedy, of course, was assassinated. Lyndon B. Johnson takes office, and there's a complete change. Security guarantees for Israel, Lyndon B. Johnson immediately gave it to them. Development of nuclear weapons, they can go ahead and do it. The United States is going to turn a blind eye. The Israel lobby, not registering as a foreign agent, don't worry about it. You don't need to register. That was the whole deal. Everything changed from that day forward. Everything changed. That's why Lyndon B. Johnson is known as the greatest friend Israel has ever had. Up until, of course, President Trump.